Welcome to the Strength Lab podcast. I am your host, Tyler Ramsey, and my special guest is Jon Heck. Thanks for hopping on the podcast today. He is a former football strength and conditioning coach and now kind of has gone to an online business for strength and conditioning, also with being a nutritionist. He has his own podcast, the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast. So go ahead and I'll link that in the description. You can check that out with all of his awesome guests. Did I miss anything there, John?
No, I don't think so. Spent the last 9 years in football strength and conditioning, worked in the NFL, college football. I played football myself. I was an offensive tackle at the University of North Carolina. Got my degree in exercise physiology, minor in sports nutrition, and I stepped away from football recently. And I've just gone full time with my private coaching business. I do primarily nutrition coaching. I work with a lot of strongman competitors, NFL guys, fighters, powerlifters, bodybuilders, and then I do the strength and conditioning piece for many of my clients as well.
Awesome. Uh, could you name off a few people, if you don't mind, like who you work with currently in the strongman industry?
Yeah, so I'm working with Nathan Goltry. Um, I'm working with Chad Coy. He's a coach these
Yeah,
days. Josh Spurgeon, Nick Wortham, um, Kyle Banta. So a handful of guys who have just recently begun working with me from the strongman realm.
yeah. One of the ladies that works out at my gym, she has won like the Masters Women's Strongman Lightweight, and she used to work out with Chad. So uh, kind of have that connection. We trying to get Chad, talk to Chad and maybe get him on the podcast. Maybe you'll get him on yours if you haven't already.
Yeah, Chad, I mean, he's a excellent coach, great dude. He'd be a good conversation to have.
Yeah, for sure. So what really got you into strength training and fitness? Was it, early on in your uh sports days? Did you work out for like high school football and stuff like that, and that kind of got you hooked in the strength training, or how did that start for you?
Yeah, so my dad, he played 12 years in the NFL. So I would, as a kid, go with him to the stadium when he was playing, and I just sort of naturally gravitated towards the weight room. It just something about it. I loved it. I was always trying to hang out with strength coaches and watch the dudes lift. And I started lifting weights in seventh grade, and man, I was just completely hooked. I mean, from that point on, nutrition, training, it just became just a massive area of interest for me, totally became my passion. To the point where, as I got into my football career, the off-season training became sort of like my in-season. Like it was that's what really fueled my competitive fire, my passion, even more so than the actual sport itself. So, yep, started at an early age, and like I said, started lifting in middle school, and then just never looked back.
Started pretty early then. That's awesome.
Yeah, man, it did. I was fortunate enough to have some good influences at an early age and have some solid direction with being in a solid strength and conditioning program as a middle schooler, and then going to a powerhouse football program for high school where we had a rock solid strength and conditioning program, and then just getting to have the influence of the NFL strength and conditioning coaches that my dad was on the team playing for, and then he eventually became a coach. He's been a coach in the NFL for a long time now, so have gotten to have some very good coaches in my life from a young age.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I think younger kids are missing is that good guidance and that solid base to start. Like I didn't start lifting until like my freshman year of college. And I still played sports throughout high school. It was just like we never had like a set thing that we had to go in and do. Like it wasn't required and stuff like that. And I feel like we were behind at my school compared to other schools that were doing things like that or had a strength coach or were made to go to a certain gym across town to do their training. So I always felt like it was kind of behind.
Yeah, I mean, working in college football strength and conditioning, we would see with our incoming freshmen, we would have guys come in who came from, advanced strength and conditioning programs, high schools with a lot of resources, a full-time strength coach, a great weight room. But then we'd have a lot of kids come who, it was like they'd never lifted weights before. So coming out of high school, it's very much a mixed bag of who's been really exposed to good quality strength and conditioning, and who hasn't. But there's nothing wrong with getting started at a later age. A lot of guys have gotten started a little bit later and gone on to have success.
Yeah. Was there a coach or mentor early on that had a major influence on you? I know I watched a little bit of your podcast with the big house. Uh,
Yeah, that's exactly who I would say is my biggest mentor for sure. So I had the opportunity to work for Joe Ken when he was the head strength coach for the Carolina Panthers. So this was back in late 2016 was when I first met House. And it was kind of baptism by fire for me. He was hard on me,
yeah,
as he was with all of his interns, new employees, and I'm glad he was. I learned fast. I was held to a high standard. I was held accountable, and he showed me the ropes of what it means to be a professional strength and conditioning coach, to train elite athletes, to handle the business side of it, the professional component of being a strength coach. And then just I learned a lot from him in terms of programming and coaching on the floor, communicating with athletes. So he started off as my boss, became a mentor, and now he and I are very close friends and colleagues.
that's awesome. So how does someone kind of get started, uh, like getting certified, educated? Is there like a formal route, or can you kind of be self-taught?
As far as getting into like team sports strength and conditioning,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I won't lie. I definitely had an advantage in the fact that I played college football, right? My playing career opened up a lot of doors on the front end, just as far as having a network, having connections. I had a connection through football that ultimately landed me an interview with Joe Ken. And not everyone has that, right?
For sure.
Most people don't. So for someone who didn't have the opportunity to play football at the college level, a lot of times it comes down to trying to find an internship. Um, there's a lot of programs. For example, I most recently worked at Troy University
Okay.
in Alabama, and we would be fired up to have a young kid come in and want to do an intern with us, regardless of if he had any legitimate formal education in it. Ultimately, we were looking for a kid who was hungry, who was going to come in and work his ass off and wanted to learn, and maybe most importantly was someone who legitimately wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach. That's what we were looking for when we were looking at interns to bring on. And like I said, we'd bring on kids who weren't, experienced or formally educated in strength and conditioning, and it was our job to ultimately teach them.
Yeah.
But we wanted kids who were going to come in, work hard, and be willing to put in the blue collar work, learn, show up early, and work their ass off. Anyway, the point is, if you want to get started in football strength and conditioning, if you can find an internship, you're going to have to be willing to work for free.
Yep.
You're going to have to be willing to undoubtedly, come in at 5 a.m. and put in some grunt work, blue collar labor. But that's how you get your foot in the door. That's how you build a network. That's how you get connected with a head strength coach, and you do a great job at your internship. Well, then you're presumably going to be recommended for something else or have an opportunity at a graduate assistant position. So if you're trying to break into football, you know, do you need the certification and the resume, the academics? Yeah, that stuff's going to help, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a network or a connection or a recommendation that's ultimately going to get you to the next level. And the only way you're going to do that is having a face-to-face relationship with a coach to put you in that position.
Yeah, I got my degree in exercise science from a small college like close to my hometown. But I had to do a 600 hour internship for exercise science, and I could kind of pick cardiac rehab, personal training, that kind of thing. So I did the personal training, and I knew the person that owned the gym. So like kind of coming out of college, it was like it's not what I know, it's who I know that got me started on my internship. And then that was fully like unpaid, getting to the gym at 4 in the morning, running a class, you know, trying to learn how to interact with clients from that are 12 years old to 80 years old, and then how to program that and just be of assistance to someone like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just and even if you don't go the strength and conditioning route in the team setting, I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in working with Gen Pop or in the the personal training realm in the private sector. So, I mean, just to your point, it's initially it's kind of who you know,
Yeah,
but at the end of the day, you've got to do a good job for that
for
person,
sure. Yeah.
right? If you want to actually get the recommendation, you've got to crush it in your first internship. So I would say, once you land the internship, you can't then be focused on, okay, I just got to get this recommendation to get to the next thing. It's like, no, focus on the internship you're in because you got
Yeah.
to bust your ass and do a great job and have undivided attention and focus with your first gig to get the next thing.
So what was like the daily thing that you would have to do like with Joe Ken? So what time did you get there? What did you have to do? What were your daily tasks?
So when I first started off with him, we were entering the very beginning of the off-season program in the NFL. So we'd be there early, 5 a.m. And I'd be setting up the field and the weight room for the training session. So we would generally start with the field work with the guys. So we'd have the team divided up into the big men, O-line, D-line, the combo mid positions, your linebackers, tight ends, running backs, and then we'd have the skill guys, wide receivers, DBs, quarterbacks, and that we'd have them divided up, and each group would have their own setup. So, we might be setting up loaded prowler sleds and med balls for the big guys. We might be setting up hurdles and bands for the combos, and a different setup for the skill guys, and then go in and set up the entire weight room because once they finish their field session, they'd come in, do the weight room portion of the training, and then we'd have to go back, reset the field for the next group, come in, reset the weight room for the next group, and then of course during the lifts themselves, we're on the floor, we're coaching, and when it's all done, you're breaking down the weight room, you're spraying down and wiping every inch of the weight room and cleaning the equipment,
Yeah.
and you're doing inventory with the supplements and vitamins and hydration that we're providing. We're on call for guys who might be coming in doing extra work, mobility work, that sort of thing. So
Okay.
and then throughout the day, different projects, tasks, whatever, ranging from physical labor to paperwork type stuff will pop up. And then, of course, you're finding time within that to do your own continued education. So just studying the program and asking questions, hey, why are we doing this? What's the thinking behind that? And you're putting in long, oftentimes, in my case, 12-hour days, and that was pretty much every day for the entire off season, and then I was with them throughout their in season as well. So I learned a lot in that first year.
Yeah. So has there been like a coaching philosophy that has changed since you started from the very beginning? Has there been like a thing that has kind of changed in your mind or like with the science?
Yeah, I would say a lot. A lot has changed. Geez, it's hard to even pin down one, but I mean, like compared to where I was when I first started back in 2016, 2017 to now, um, you come in and you get a gig in the NFL, and you've been training for a while, competing in powerlifting and studying, and you think you know a lot, and then you quickly realize as you get a few years into it that you don't, that you don't know
Hmm.
nearly as much as you think. And I like that. I like the fact that there's so much out there that I feel like I have yet to learn. I like being a student of my craft and always continuing to learn. And I think early on, I learned the weight room portion of things pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Certainly not saying I know it all in that realm, but as I got further into my strength and conditioning career, learning the speed development side of things, uh, return to play protocols, kind of more of the therapy side, working with guys coming off of injuries, And then just all the field work, change of direction, acceleration, deceleration, plyometrics. Those were things that I really kind of had to hone in on because as a powerlifter and strongman, right? You a big guy,
Yeah.
you're going to tend to gravitate towards the weight room knowledge. So I really had to put myself in the shoes of the skill guys, the wide receivers, the DBs, and learn the field work a lot more. And then just over the years, working with bodybuilders, you start to take away a lot of things from optimal hypertrophy training and
Yeah.
certainly incorporating nutrition. And then you get deeper into competing in strongman. You learn a lot more about programming for strongman, and then programming for a beginner is going to be different than programming for a really strong, advanced heavyweight male. Getting into powerlifting, learning the new, just further nuances of powerlifting training. Um, there's a lot that I've just continued to learn over the years. So I would say it's always changing, always evolving.
Yeah. Is there anybody that you follow now in the strongman, like programming? Is there anybody that you like to follow in that area or a bodybuilder?
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys in strongman who I'll follow along with their content. Geez, his name escapes me. It's MT Training Systems, MST
Oh
Training.
yeah, MST, Shane German.
Yes, exactly,
Yep.
exactly. Apologies for the name escaping me there, but I
No,
think
you're
he's
good.
putting out a lot of great information. He seems to be really sharp with coaching the events themselves. I had Andrew Clayton on my
Hmm.
podcast. I think he's a pretty darn sharp coach
Yeah.
with strongman, and then Joe Ken. I mean, he's working with strongman competitors now. He does more of the general strength and conditioning programming for those guys, not necessarily all the specific event work. But I mean, he's a great resource for programming for strongman. And then just observing what different athletes are doing. Chad Coy, I mean, he's another good coach. Um, so yeah, I never I never want to just hone in on one guy and be like, oh, he's got the answers. I'm gonna just follow his philosophies. It's you look around at what everyone's doing and you take nuggets from certain people. Oh, I like that. Oh,
For
that's
sure.
smart. But then there's things that you'll see those same guys doing that you don't agree with. So it's always just taking certain things you like, you agree with, experimenting with it, incorporating it, and just formulating your own philosophies.
Yeah, I know Joe was working with Brian Shaw there for a while before like his last year or two in Strongman. And
Yeah, he
he
was.
had Brian doing a bunch of speed work and stuff, and Brian was kind of seemed like he's never done that before. So that was kind of interesting to watch him, somebody that has been doing strongman and who's won, 4 World Strongest Man titles, still learn programming and how to work out and like the speed work. And that was always interesting to look at.
Yeah, and I mean Brian, he's a smart guy.
Yeah.
As far as the athletes in the sport go, he's going to be one of the smarter guys and probably have been doing things, really well for from the majority of his career. But you look at a lot of competitors, and a lot of these guys are very strong and gifted athletes, but that doesn't necessarily mean they've been utilizing quality programming.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not just limited to strongman. You look at any sport, and a lot of times the most gifted, talented guys, they just have it, right? And then you look at their training and their programming, and you're like, dude, like this could be so much better. There's so much untapped potential here. Um, so it's always surprising how basic and often lacking the training is for a lot of these top guys. And then, you get them in the hands of an experienced coach like Joe Ken, and then it can take things next level for them.
Yeah. And then at that same time, they may not be utilizing, their nutrition the best way possible either. Some they say they're eating 10,000 calories, but they're eating 10,000 calories of shit, and they may not be feeling best, performing their best. So pairing that with a good nutritionist and good food, it could like skyrocket their progress
Yeah,
immensely.
I've always said nutrition is almost always the missing piece of the puzzle for for lifters and for athletes. So I work with, a lot of my guys are strongman competitors now, big guys that I work with for nutrition, football players as well, Gen Pop, powerlifters, bodybuilders. But man, when the nutrition is dialed in, almost everything tends to follow suit and improve with it. When you can improve your body composition, improve your gut health, your digestion, which gives you an enhanced ability to eat more food and actually utilize the nutrients that you're eating. And just as you get a little bit leaner, as you um, really revamp your diet in terms of the foods you're eating to optimize for, like I said, digestion, gut health, reduce inflammation, keep your blood sugar in a better spot. Your recovery is better, your blood pressure is better, your sleep is better, you feel better, you perform better, and everything ultimately just takes off with it.
Yeah. So what are the most important foundational movement patterns that you follow when writing a program for strength, like in the football setting? Do you guys follow? I know. I'll just let you elaborate on that.
Well, it's a very broad question. It's a very broad question. What are my it's going to vary for, so we're talking football here, correct?
Yeah, yeah. We'll talk football here.
Well, it's going to range from the position group you're working with, right?
Okay.
A lot of times the weight room work for the big guys is going to be different on some level than the weight room work for the skill guys. It's going to depend on what phase of the year are we in? Are we in the winter training program? Are we in the summer? Are we in season? Are we in spring ball? But if you're looking at, let's call it winter off season for football players. This is usually the time of the year where you can really focus on doing some hypertrophy work, really getting guys stronger. As you get later into the off season, more towards the summer, as you're approaching training camp and approaching the season, a lot of the training shifts more to prioritize power, explosiveness, the plyometrics, the conditioning, the field work, all those variables. And not to say that we're not touching on those in the winter, but the winter is kind of the time of year where we can really put a lot of efforts into the weight room. So just looking at big guys, for example, I'll often draw parallels to strongman training. And it's not to say with our football guys we're doing a lot of strongman event work. We're not going to be touching logs and
Yeah,
Atlas stones and things like that, but overhead pressing, um, hinging, uh, just building head to toe holistic, well-rounded strength. It goes a long way. Now, when working with football players, we have to put an emphasis on unilateral training. So more single leg stuff, working in not just the sagittal plane, working in the frontal plane. So doing lateral movements, things like that. And to be honest, I would program a lot of that stuff for strongman competitors as well. I put a lot of value in holistic training. Just make the best general, strongest, most well-rounded athlete you can, whether it's for strongman or for football. But for both sports, I really like front squatting. It's going to be for strongman, so much is anterior loaded, right? Whether it's
yeah,
a log, a stone, a sandbag, a zercher. So hammering the front squat, it's a good way to get transfer over to those movements, and it's going to be less lower back taxing. And then for football players, it's a movement that oftentimes it's going to allow guys to have a good clean squat pattern that they can get to depth. It's going to challenge their mid back, their core, their upper back. It's going to be a safer movement. It's going to be a challenging movement that forces them to go a little bit lighter than a back squat, for example. It's going to be less low back taxing. So front squats, whether it's tempo, paused, dynamic tempo. That's a movement I really like to use for our football guys. Like I said, I'm a big proponent of overhead pressing. That's something I took away from strongman
yeah,
training. If I could do away completely with bench pressing, um, with strongman competitors, I would rarely program flat pressing other than maybe, an accessory work, doing some close grip. And with football players, I'm kind of in the same boat. It's like we don't need to bench press. right? I prefer an overhead press variation because it's going to teach you to generate power through your lower body into your core and into your upper body, which is what you do when you're on the field engaging your upper body. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling here. It's a very big topic. You can do an
Yeah.
entire podcast in and of itself on for training. And again, this is another thing. It's like I wouldn't just tack down like this is my one narrow philosophy with training any particular type of athlete. Like it's a very big picture approach.
Do you think the bench press for the NFL Combine is dumb or not as useful of an exercise to use?
Yeah, I don't think it really gives any legitimate insight into into an athlete's ability that's going to be relevant in football. Um, it doesn't give you, even that much insight on strength. It's much more of a, strength endurance test. Now I sort of get it because it's light, it's high rep, therefore theoretically safer. But yeah, it's a lot of the combine testing is kind of archaic. Just it's how it's always been done.
Yeah.
But when you look at it, it's like this really doesn't give any valuable insight. It might give you some perspective into, okay, this guy's a hard worker in the weight room if he puts up a good number, but you know, you talk to most NFL coaches, they're not putting much stock at all in the bench press test.
What would you like to see instead of that?
Well, it's hard to say because it's like what's a test that would be a legitimate indication of relevant strength versus what is realistic and safe to do in a combine setting. I mean, shit, if I was just gonna had free reign of it and just what's the regardless of safety and logistics, what are going to be the best tests of relevant strength? I'd love to see a push press or a standing strict press or a front squat. Show me a football player who's got a great, strong front squat, an explosive, strong push press, or a strict press. That's going to tell me a lot more about his strength. Like I said, that's relevant to football. I mean, shit.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to really get into it, like show me some sort of a single leg variation, some sort of a
Hmm.
single leg squat, your
That'd be
strength on
interesting.
that. And again, I certainly wouldn't really propose this for combine testing from a logistics and safety standpoint, but I think those sorts of exercises are a better indicator of like I said, relevant sports, transferable strength.
During any time or any phase, like off season, in season, winter, summer, do you ever program like loaded carries or anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I love loaded carries for mainly for offense and defensive linemen. More of a GPP conditioning type application. So, like when I was working at UNC, we would do a lot of loaded carries. Um, uh, as, like I said, GPP conditioning type work. We would do heavy sandbag front carries. We would do farmer carries with a trap bar.
Hmm.
We would even possibly do some sort of a Zercher carry. When I was at Troy, we were big on farmer carries. So I think loaded carries are a tremendous
Yeah.
exercise to utilize for football players.
Yeah. I have everybody that I train do some type of carry, whether that's from, sandbag carries, single arm farmer carry, trap bar carry, anything like that.
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, it's great because it's very low learning curve. There's
Yeah.
essentially no technique to it. If if you want to talk about quote unquote functional strength, right? It's something that can carry over to real life, whether you're an athlete or you're just a general population person trying to, um, just get stronger and be able to apply that strength in real life. So I'm a big fan of loaded carrying in general.
How do you structure progression over time? Is it more of like linear, block, conjugate? Is it a mixture of all of them? Like, how do you do that, like in a football setting?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of conjugate. In a football setting, in the off season, often it's probably going to be linear,
Okay.
pretty simple. I mean, you've got to take into account the fact that you're working with 120 20 guys.
Yeah.
You're working with a lot of guys who they're not lifters, right? They're football players. And we're just trying to improve general qualities that are going to transfer over to their sport. And usually in any one given phase, you're operating with about 8 weeks. In college, in NFL, it's less. But a college winter off-season program is going to usually be 8 weeks. The summer program is going to usually be 8 weeks. So you're not dealing with a 12 to 16 week window to run a bunch of different blocks and get fancy with doing undulating periodization, things like that. Now, I will say in season, um, I do like using some undulation where we'll go a couple weeks focusing on strength work, and then we'll rotate to a couple weeks doing dynamic effort work. Then we'll
Okay.
rotate back to strength work, then rotate back to dynamic effort work. So we're kind of flip-flopping between light work for speed and heavier work for low volume. That way we're maintaining, if not building, both qualities. And then, the dynamic effort weeks give the guys some rest from the heavy weights. We're able to get a good neural stimulus, keep them explosive, keep them powerful, and then maintain their top end strength as we get to the heavy stuff. So that the in season is an example where we'll get have a little bit more undulation within the periodization. Because again, we're working with a longer period of time. In college, you're working with a 12-week season, and the NFL, you're working with an 18-week regular season. But yeah, I mean, in the off season, you're working, like I said, you're working with football. You've got a short period of time. You've got a ton of kids, ranging from freshmen who have no technique to seniors who've been in the program for a while. So oftentimes, simple is better with those guys.
Yeah. Do you, for the dynamic effort work, do you use based off percentages or do you just use it based on like how fast they move? Like how do you measure that?
Well, we'll do it. I've done it every which way you can
Okay.
do it.
Yeah.
It might be, we'll almost always have a bar accelerometer on there, whether it's a Tendo unit or using, perch. Um, or one of the other different camera systems to measure bar speed. But it might be, hey, here's your minimum speed parameter. Like you need to hit zero point 0.8 meters per second average velocity, and here's your starting weight. And if you beat zero point 0.8, then you're going to bump it up and just let's see how heavy we can go while beating zero point 0.8. Or it might be they've got a set percentage. Maybe it's 60% bar weight plus bands or chains, and there's not a set speed, but it's just how fast can you move this set weight. And then we're recording, okay, what was your fastest speed? Or back to my original example, it's you've got a set speed that you're trying to beat, and we'll record what was the heaviest weight that you got to.
Okay.
So there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do that. what
Yeah.
what is more important is that they are generating maximum intent to move the bar as fast as possible, and the velocity reading is going to drive that intent because the football players, they're competitive. They want to move faster than the guy at the rack next to them. They want to beat themselves, right? So just having that visual feedback and cueing them to put maximal intent into every rep, that's really the magic of the dynamic effort training.
Yeah. How do you address individual weaknesses or sticking points? Do you focus on any of that stuff for like individuals that like would come to you for anything like that? Or is that basically a lot of strongman and powerlifting things?
So I mean, in a football setting, it's harder because it's much different than what I do now because right now I work with individuals.
Yeah.
So if I'm working with an individual strongman competitor or powerlifter, or even a football guy one-on-one, we're very much able to address individual weaknesses. Now, in the strength and conditioning football team setting, like I said, you're working with, up to 120 guys. So
Yeah, that'd be a pain in the
it,
ass.
it's you're not getting a lot of just true individual one-on-one customized programs right now. If we're dealing with some of the priority guys, like some of our best players, they might be getting some specialized treatment. If we're dealing with an older guy or maybe a guy who's got certain injuries or mileage that they're dealing with, especially in the NFL, there's a lot more kind of one-on-one customization. But when it comes to the college setting, you know, and again, we're just trying to make them better football players,
Yeah.
right? So when it comes to like sticking points, things like that, like I'm not so worried about making this kid a better squatter or a better bench presser, right? We're trying to make them just generally bigger, stronger, faster, more durable to be a better football player. So it's we might look at a kid and say, oh, what does this kid need for football? He needs to get bigger, or he just needs to generally get his lower body stronger, or he needs to be more explosive or more mobile. And we might shift their programming to be more to address those general traits. And a lot of times it's not just one kid. It's like, okay, our entire offensive line needs to get more mobile, right? So we're going to be putting in more loaded mobility work with our linemen. So it's often, like I said, unless it's kind of a priority special guy, a lot of times it's programming that's generalized and being applied to a number of guys.
How important is work capacity for strength development? And then how do you build work capacity?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important. No matter what sport you're doing, you need to be in good shape to get strong. You know, if you're dealing with strongman or powerlifting, like as you get into your competition prep, you're going to be going through some grueling sessions, especially like a strongman. If you're going to be prepping for a show where you've got max rep in 60 seconds type things, or you've got, you know, a lot of moving events, you need to be in good shape for that. And you need to be in good shape for your training of those events. So even in the off season, there should be a base of GPP work, of some level of conditioning work. So you're in shape, not just for competition, but you're in shape for your training. So you can get through your training and apply max force and not be fatigued by the time you get to the second or third exercise you're doing. So having a good base of work capacity, like I said, no matter what type of athlete you are, is almost always going to be crucial. So oftentimes you're addressing that on the front end, whether it's kind of the first block of the off season. You know, if I'm getting my hands on someone for the first time and we're kind of going through their first training block, and you know, let's say we're a ways out from competition, I'll be doing a lot of every minute on the minute type stuff.
Mm.
So it might be a light sandbag carry, and we're doing, you know, eight eight rounds of 30 feet carries every minute on the minute. We might do that with a yoke or a farmer walk. Um, we might do it with like density sets on a front squat. It might be like eight doubles or eight triples with 1 minute rest in between sets, things like that. Or we might finish off the session with just true conditioning work, or it might even be like just getting on the bike and doing some, you know, some light, steady state type stuff just to build up their aerobic capacity. So we start with an emphasis on it in the front end, and then there's always going to be at least some maintenance work with that as the program progresses.
What's some general advice on calorie intake when trying to gain strength without too much fat?
Yeah. So when it comes to programming the diet side of things, it's kind of a misconception that a calorie surplus in and of itself is going to just directly make you stronger, right? There's often this association with like, oh, it's, you know, I'm in prep, I just need to eat everything in sight. Um, I really prefer to address body composition from the diet side of things before we get into prep, right? Like the best thing we're going to do with a calorie surplus is building muscle. We don't necessarily need a calorie surplus to optimize performance. In fact, I would often advocate if you're in prep, like we don't want to be in a calorie surplus. Why? Because a calorie surplus is often going to make you a little bit lethargic, a little bit sluggish. You're just eating a ton of food. And when you're eating the most food out of the year, it's not necessarily when you're performing at your best, right? So if I'm working with a guy and he's a guy we need to put muscle on, I'm going to try to do that in the off season. Like let's really push the food, push the tissue gain in the off season. That way, when we get into prep, we can kind of scale the calories back to maintenance. You're not bogged down by your food.
Yeah.
We don't need a surplus to fuel your training. We just need to maintenance. And then at that point, it becomes a lot more about what are you eating as opposed to how much. Like, let's eat foods that are going to digest well. So when you get to training, the food is digested, it's light on your stomach, your blood sugar's stable. So anyway, the point is, whether it's losing fat or gaining tissue, calorie deficit or surplus, I prefer to do that further out from competition. The goal of that is not really strength at the time. It's like I said, either losing fat or gaining muscle. And then once we get into prep, calories maintenance ideally, and let's just really focus on training and use the new muscle tissue we added or use the leaner improved body composition so we can have better conditioning, better recovery, better work capacity.
Do you use nutrient timing strategies with your clients? Like pre,
Yeah,
post?
so I mean, I do put quite a bit of stock on their pre-workout meal.
Okay.
And I'll try to have a guy eat their pre-workout meal, 60 to 90 minutes before they train. And we're going to put a premium on carbohydrates, low fat, so it digests easy, it sits light on the stomach. And then I'm a big proponent of intra-workout nutrition, so I'll generally program an intra-workout shake. For my guys, it's going to consist of an easy digesting carbohydrate, essentials, and electrolytes. That's huge. So pre, intra, and post-workout electrolyte intake is huge for me, and it's often an overlooked variable. And then, we'll also put a premium on the post-workout meal. Again, just getting some easy digesting carbs and proteins in there. So the pre-workout meal, the pre-workout electrolyte consumption, the intra-workout fluids and electrolytes, and the post-workout carbs and proteins, I do put a premium on that. Now, for the rest of the day, timing becomes a much more secondary variable. It's more about making sure your meals are spaced out enough that you're properly digesting one meal before you start the next. But you saw I'll try to space meals out 2, 3 to 4 hours during the day.
How many meals were you eating when you did your big bulk?
Um, I was and still am eating five.
Okay.
Sometimes when I'm cutting, I'll often do 6 meals. Just that extra feeding period, it just helps keep hunger at bay more. Whereas when I'm really pushing the food hard, I prefer to do five. It's one less meal you've got to prepare. It's one less time you got to sit down and do the chore of eating again.
Yeah.
So I prefer 5 meals when my food is high, and then 6 meals when my food is low.
And does a lot of that come from like whole foods or do you supplement a lot?
Almost completely whole food. I'll do one meal where I'll use whey isolate. And I'll usually mix that with Greek yogurt. But I really don't, outside of my intra-workout shake, very, very few liquid calories. I
Okay.
might do one meal that has a fat-free milk and Fairlife milk in it for 15 grams of the protein in that meal, like especially if I'm doing a post-workout cereal or something like that. Now, right now, for myself, I'm in a maintenance phase. Food is still pretty dang high. Um, I'll incorporate some orange juice, some fruit juices to get some of my carbohydrates at this point. But generally speaking, I'm leaning almost exclusively on whole food.
Okay. I feel like that would be pretty hard for some people would hear that and be like, "Oh, I can't eat 5 meals. I don't have the time to eat 5 meals." So it is possible. You don't always have uh to drink your calories and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's strategies to work around it. Like I've been known for doing my chicken shakes, which I mean to me that's a whole food, right? Now I
Yeah.
just obviously convert it into liquid form, but when I was coaching in football, I would often have to take a whole food meal and turn it into liquid and drink it. So I would like between lifting groups, I might have 5 minutes. I don't have time to sit down and chew through a big meal, so I'd blend up my chicken and water because I wanted to get a whole food meat source, but this way I can just drink it. And then I'd pair that with a carbohydrate shake. So that might be, blended up oats with fruit, honey, and get my carbs in quote unquote liquid form that way. But there's other ways to just make food easier to eat. Utilizing a product like cream of rice. That's a very easy way to get carbohydrates in because it's a food that you don't really have to chew. It's an easy texture to eat. And then, Stan Efferding and his vertical diet monster mash, like adding chicken stock to your meat and rice to make it, more moist and easier to
Yeah.
chew. Just little strategies like that to make meals easier and faster to eat.
How was the chicken shake? Hard to get down, or you got used to
No, I don't mind it at all.
it?
The key is I like to do crock pot chicken so that it's super tender. It just
Mm,
shreds apart and then it liquefies really easily in a blender. And then I kind of found a good water to chicken ratio to where it truly liquefies and it's not chunky. Serve it cold. That's a key. If you drink it warm, it's less appealing to me. But man, a good, nicely liquefied cold chicken shake to me, like I'll sip it like it's just another drink, no problem.
was that Blaine Sumner, or wasn't that who did a bunch of chicken shakes?
Yeah, Blaine Sumner was
Okay.
was definitely one of the meat shake OGs. I mean, he would
Yeah.
he would do it with beef too, but he was big on chicken shakes. Then Derek Poundstone would do
Okay.
tuna shakes back in the day. So I'm certainly not the first guy to do meat shakes, but I'm probably one of the few people still doing it.
What are some of the best micronutrients that people should focus on when trying to gain strength or just be healthy?
Potassium, that's one that most people are missing. Potassium. Most people, athletes especially, are under consuming it. Um, and everyone associates potassium with bananas, which is true. There's a lot of potassium in bananas, but you can get it from spinach, potatoes, Greek yogurt. You can get it from meat. And then I'll often just supplement with it. I like to use coconut water as my intra-workout liquid because it's very rich in potassium. So, I mean, if I had to pick one micronutrient that people should address and will have a direct performance enhancing effect, it would be potassium. Now you got to make sure you're pairing it with adequate fluid and sodium. So sodium is going to be another one, magnesium is going to be another one, but the electrolytes that's really I I would say that is the premium that you should be focusing on. And then of course, things like zinc, fish oil, vitamin D. Those are all good things to potentially supplement with.
Are there any common nutrition mistakes that hold people back from gaining strength?
Can you just give me 2 seconds to pee real quick?
Yeah, you're good.
Um, either edit this out or this is a good teaching technique for the audience. I've been drinking lots of fluids and electrolytes, so I'll be back in 20 seconds.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, man. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Yeah, for if that didn't get edited out, good reminder for people. If you're not having to pee at least every hour, you're probably under consuming your fluids.
I had to pee before we got on here. And I was like, okay, let's hopefully I can make it a whole, hour and 30 minutes or so, however long this podcast is going to be before I have to
Right.
pee again.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat your last question? I think it was a nutrition mistake type
Yeah, is
question.
there any common nutrition mistakes that kind of hold people back? from gaining size and strength?
Um, yeah, I mean, most people are pretty unsuccessful with both of those endeavors. So, I mean, I could make a laundry list of mistakes. I'd say for relevant to this audience and conversation, looking at strongman competitors, I think, and I did an Instagram post on this the other day. I think a lot of competitors overconsume dietary fat, um, and underconsume carbohydrates. you know, uh, a lot of guys build their diets kind of old school, lots of whole eggs, fatty red meats, full fat dairy and cheese and things like that, and then probably additional junk food. Those types of excessive calories are not helping you. They're going to slow down digestion. They're going to slow down your metabolism. An excess of dietary fat, those calories have a much better chance of being stored as body fat. So I really prefer to shift diets for strongman competitors and football players and big athletes in general, away from the high fat and in favor of high carbohydrate and lower fat. Carbs they're actually going to be used as a preferential fuel source. They can be stored as glycogen. We can really build up your metabolism by training your body to handle more and more carbs. They're easier to eat, they're lower in calories, they digest easier. So a mistake I often see is just over consuming fat. And then just people tend to just be inconsistent with their diet. Especially when they're losing weight, they can't stick to it. If you
Yeah.
really want to transform your body, like you've got to invest 16 plus weeks on legitimate consistency. And inevitably over the course of that time, there's probably going to have to be caloric adjustments that are made to break through plateaus. And most people don't really know how to do that, and that's where someone like me comes in, doing the nutrition coaching.
Are there any non-negotiables that you follow and focus on in your diet? Like, do you focus on like 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight? Or do you go higher? Do you go lower? Are there any like you have a minimum amount of water you drink? Is there any like non-negotiables that you follow on a daily basis?
Um, I'd say the only real non-negotiables are if you're trying to lose body fat, you need to be in the presence of a calorie deficit, and if you're trying to gain weight, there needs to be a calorie surplus. Now, even with that said, I'll often utilize a carb cycling protocol.
Okay.
Break the week up into low carb, medium carb, and high carb days. So there might be days during the week where you're in a surplus, other days when you're in a deficit, but the net gain across the week, if you're gaining, it's going to be a net surplus, and if you're losing fat, it's going to be a net deficit. So, I mean, those are really the only true non-negotiables. When it comes to protein, usually I'll err on the side of a gram of protein per pound of body weight. Now, this can change if you're dealing with someone who's really overweight. If you're dealing with a guy who's 400 pounds and they're just carrying tons of body fat, we don't need to consume 400 plus grams of protein
Yeah.
in a situation like that. Then you can kind of defer more towards, gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. But if I'm dieting, we're in a deficit. Usually I'm gonna bring protein up a bit. It's more satiating. It's better to lean on the side of higher protein when we're trying to retain tissue, because we're in a deficit
Yeah.
compared to when we're growing. I'll, if anything, reduce protein slightly and just increase carbs. Because you're in a surplus and food is higher, you're going to be at a much lower risk of losing muscle tissue. So you don't need as much protein. And like I said, protein's more satiating. It's harder to eat. So it's heavier in your stomach. So oftentimes let's say I'm dealing with a 300-pound guy. At maintenance, probably 300 grams of protein. In a deficit, we might bump that up 10% to like 330, 350. And then when we're growing, we might drop that down to, as low as 270.
Okay.
And then, but bring the carbs up.
What's your take on cheat meals? Is it necessary once in a while, or are they like kind of overhyped?
I'll often program the opportunity for a weekly cheat meal when I'm working with any nutrition client. Um, when we're cutting, when we're dieting, especially when you're working with someone who's getting really lean, this is where I see more legitimate, like physiological benefit from having the quote unquote cheat meal. Now, with that said, if I'm working, let's say I'm working with a bodybuilder, um, I'll often do a refeed meal with
Okay.
them. And
Yeah.
depending on who it is, their metabolism, how big they are, that might be every 7 days. That might be every 5 days for the real freaks. That might be every 10 to 14 days. But usually, if I'm using a refeed, there's a few goals we're trying to get here. We're trying to keep the metabolism from down regulating, right? We've been dieting for a while, calories are low, your metabolism is going to start to decrease, right? It's just a survival mechanism your body has. It senses, hey, we're starving. We got to hold on to our body's resources, right? We need to survive through a long winter. Well, by incorporating incremental refeeds where we're in a surplus, we're kind of sending the signal to the body, hey, no, food is not scarce. Keep the metabolism running high. Um, Other than that, we're going to refill glycogen stores. We're going to just get some good hormonal response, endorphin type response from the calorie surplus. But the parameters I'll put on the refeed is making it a very high carb meal, right? When we think about a cheat meal, we're just kind of thinking about go eat whatever you want, pizza, burgers, ice cream. Much less benefit from that compared to hey, go eat as many carbohydrates as you want, but keep the dietary fat low.
Okay.
So that might be a big sushi meal. That might be, getting a big foot-long sub or acai bowl or smoothies, a bunch of, cinnamon toast crunch and fat-free milk, fat-free pancakes, things like that. Again, we're getting the surplus, but we're getting them from carbohydrates. And if you're depleted, your glycogen stores are running on low. So we're going to be able to store those excess carbohydrate calories as muscle glycogen. Whereas if we just have this no holds barred cheat meal where you can eat whatever you want, you're probably going to overconsume calories. I mean, you can easily throw down multiple thousands of calories if
Yeah.
you
Just
go
go to
eat
McDonald's.
yeah, maybe if you get a large pizza and dessert and wash it down with a Coke, like you're eating a few thousand calories, and all those surplus fatty calories are probably going to be stored as body fat, and we don't want that. It's not beneficial at that point. So a lot of the advanced bodybuilders will legitimately benefit from the big refeed meal. And then when you're working with the real freaks, really lean guys with a ton of muscle tissue, guys like that, their body just seems to do sorcery and they can eat the big burger and fries cheat meal and seemingly benefit from it.
Yeah.
But most people, that's not the case. Now, if I'm working with someone who's growing and they're in a surplus, oftentimes I'll just program in like just a flexible meal where it's like, hey, go have an untracked meal with your girlfriend or your spouse, or go have an untracked meal where you can just be a human being. But I'll tell them just eat like a normal human. Like, don't try to make this some big gluttonous cheat meal. I mean, our food's already high. Like, we're already in a surplus. We're not going to benefit from just some exceptionally big meal on top of that, which is another mistake I'll see competitors make. They're like, "Oh, I've got a big deadlift tomorrow. I need to go eat a full cheesecake the night before." It's like, no, dude, you're already in a surplus. You've got all the caloric resources you need. Just eating some big junk meal the night before, there's no physiological benefit to that that's going to help you tomorrow. Now,
Yeah.
the flip side of that is if you're deep in a diet, okay, well, this is where the big meal the night before could help you.
Do you have a go-to cheat meal that you like to splurge on?
Are we talking refeed meal or are we talking legitimate cheat meal?
Let's do both.
Refeed, it's going to be sushi for me. I like to just go out and just throw down, 40 to 50 pieces of sushi. And that's usually it sits pretty easy on the stomach. It's delicious. I get a ton of carbs from that. Or I might do, I love pancakes. So just doing a fat-free pancake mix with, maple syrup, something like that. If I'm doing a true cheat meal, Dude, it's usually just by whatever by a craving. Um, if I'm gonna do like a clean cheat meal, I'd go to a steakhouse, get a calamari and bread appetizer, get a big ribeye, loaded baked potato, and finish it off with a slice of cheesecake or something. Um, if it's gonna be just a gluttonous cheat meal, it might be pizza, it might be hell, it might be Chinese takeout. Oftentimes it's gonna be just whatever I'm craving.
Yeah. For context, you are 6'7" and
330.
330. So
Yeah.
for all those people watching, he is a very big and jacked man. So
Yeah, my metabolism at this point can handle some food.
that's awesome. Gonna do a couple questions on some hot takes.
Oh, okay.
Is the squat really the king of all lifts for athletes, or is the squat overrated?
I don't think there's any king of all lifts for athletes.
Okay.
I mean, if you're a power lifter, then okay, maybe the squat's king for you because it's part of your sport. But outside of powerlifting, there's no sport that requires you to squat. So no, there's no magic from back squatting. Now, I'm almost always going to include some variation of a squat pattern, whether that's a front squat, a back squat, a safety bar squat. I mean, hell, if I'm working with a veteran NFL guy, it might be a belt squat.
Hmm.
So there's only, or it might be a single leg squat for a skill guy. But there's always going to be some sort of squat pattern. But to just label some specific exercise that is not actually a part of their sport and call that the king of all exercises, no, that's ridiculous to me.
Do Olympic lifts belong in every athletic program, or are there better alternatives?
Um, I don't think I don't think they're a necessity. Um, when I was at UNC, for example, and I was with the Houston Texans, I mean, we did not use power cleans. And people always say the Olympic lifts, and really what they mean is the power clean.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't see hardly any football program that's snatching or doing clean and jerks, right? It's always a power clean. So it always kind of irks me when we say the Olympic lifts as if you're doing anything other than a power clean. Um, and a power clean that's an accessory to the clean and jerk in Olympic lifting. But is that a necessary tool? No. Can it be a useful tool? Yeah, absolutely. Um, my thought on it would be it's a very technically demanding movement. For the most part, you're probably going to have to invest a lot of time teaching it. And even then, you're going to have some guys who just aren't really doing it very well. When you're
yeah,
working with a football team, you're working with 120 guys. I mean, you're not going to have 120, no matter how good of a coach you are, you're not going to have 120 guys who are executing a beautiful power clean. So oftentimes, if I'm writing the program, I'll probably defer to, a trap bar shrug pull, a trap bar jump shrug, some sort of loaded throwing, loaded jumping, things like that. So, if you've got players who can do a good, solid power clean, yeah, it's a great tool. But is it necessary? No.
do we overemphasize sport-specific training too early in development?
Yeah. Like, are you talking with youth, with
Yeah,
just younger
yeah,
kids?
yeah, like overall youth.
Yeah, for sure. I think just free play, right? Just getting out in the playground, the monkey bars, whatever, PE. Like, I think at a younger age, long term, you're going to benefit from just general sport, right? Just get good at a lot of different sports. Get good at body weight movements. Just becoming holistically more well-rounded um, for youth, especially. I think that's the way to go. And if you're just at a young age putting all your eggs in the basket of one specific sport, I mean, that might work for some people. I mean, some people are just, hey, they're born to be amazing football players, and if that
Yeah.
kid starts off specialized in football from an early age, he's probably going to go on to have a great career. But most people are not like that. and they're probably going to benefit from a more just generalized holistic approach.
How do you feel about athletes doing bodybuilding style accessories? Is it helpful for like muscle tissue or is it a waste of time?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest ways that we can benefit an athlete as a strength and conditioning coach is by adding lean tissue. And what's the best way to add lean tissue? A bodybuilding style approach. So I would absolutely be a proponent of utilizing, bodybuilding type accessory work, even building an entire block or phase dedicated to hypertrophy work for athletes. I mean, very few athletes will not benefit from adding some lean tissue, at least during some phase of the year. So, uh, what's the best way to add muscle tissue? Well, who does it better than anyone than the bodybuilders?
Bodybuilders. Is injury prevention a myth or can it really be trained?
I think it's,
Just
I think
don't,
you can I think you can do things that are going to make athletes more durable in general. Can you just wholesale prevent injuries? No, of course not. I mean, like you look at football, like you can have the best program in the world and there's still going to be injuries. There's so many things
yeah.
when you've got 11 guys getting in basically a car crash on the field every play. Like no matter how good your offseason was, those guys, people are still going to get hurt. Now, can you really properly expose guys to load and to preparing their tissue to produce and absorb forces and properly acclimating them to decelerating and changing direction and running at max velocity? Like you can absolutely put them in a much safer and better position with a good off-season program. And like I said, help make guys more durable. So, can you wholesale prevent all injuries? No, of course not. Can you put guys in a better position to have a higher chance of not getting hurt? Yeah, yeah, you can.
How do you feel about machines in athletic training programs, underused or unnecessary? Did you guys ever use a bunch of like
Underused, underused.
underused?
I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, underused. I think I think there's a lot of benefit to machine work for any athlete to improve general traits that are going to apply to their sport. If we're trying to add lean tissue, machines are probably a better choice than barbells and dumbbells, because you can isolate a target muscle group and you can safely isolate that muscle and put full force output into that muscle, and train it to or near failure. I think machines are a great tool for guys in a return to play setting, guys who are coming off of injuries. If you can get them in machines, you're going to be able to get them training effectively earlier compared to if you're just limited to barbells and dumbbells, right? Machines have a very low learning curve. If you've got a guy, hey, we don't have much time with this guy, we kind of just need to get right to training, you can get a lot out of machine work because, again, you don't have to teach the technique with it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're just you're exposing the tissue to load with machine work. You're properly isolating target tissue and having it absorb and produce force in a very controlled bar path or groove. So I think there's a lot of value to machine work. Should you build a program 100% around it? No, of course not. But um, if I was building the perfect program, there would be machine work present in it.
What's one book or resource that really impacted your life in the world of strength and conditioning?
I get asked this question a lot, like, oh, what was name a book? And I'm kind of like, man, there's not like one book that I can just tack down as like, man, I like this is the holy grail. Like I've pulled quality nuggets out of a lot of different books. I think the best learning resource that has benefited me the most is working with coaches myself and going through it myself from a nutrition standpoint. I've worked with several of the top bodybuilding nutrition coaches in the industry, and I went through their diet phases myself, both fat loss and growing, and I learned hands-on. I went through it myself with training. Um, putting a lot of stock in my own programming, experimenting, trying new methods with myself, whether it's training, mobility work, recovery. I think getting your own personal experience and under the guidance of a coach and getting different philosophies and applying them to yourself and going through it, I think that has been the most valuable learning tool to me, more so than any one particular book.
Awesome. That wraps up today's episode. I want to thank Jon Heck for taking the time out of his busy day to hop on the podcast. Where can people follow you at? Is there any last words you'd like to say?
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me on. I put out a lot of content on Instagram. You look me up, just Jon Heck. There's no H in John, it's just Jon Heck. What the heck 71 on Instagram. I put out nearly daily training and nutrition content on there. If you're inquiring about coaching, you can send me a DM there. I've got my website, hammerchiselperformance.com. I've got training programs available on the site, an ebook available as well. And then check out my podcast, the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast, YouTube and Spotify. The links for that are in my Instagram bio. Um, and then I put out a lot of content on the main channel, my YouTube page as well.
Awesome, John. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be on here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Appreciate you having me.